Hey, there he is. Did you meet my friend?
I love them.
From a distance, right?
Get a picture with her. No, please. She did.
Well, this one likes that camera. Amazing. Knows that he's on film, right?
Bara i den vägen.
Ja.
He doesn't want to go in now.
Det där är tungt alltså.
You like you. Du fick bästa grejen igår. Tack på det.
Ja.
He got a little taste of it.
Så det är inte fan.
Oh, it's got ice in it?
Vänta med som mask.
Och käka.
Nej.
Käka inte så.
I didn't produce that album.
I heard it from Tuber.
Yeah, I've never even met them. And they're from Phoenix, I think, from Arizona.
How are you? How are we going to do this thing? How are
Are we
you?
going in here? But when you see it in the context of the show, and with the rock and roll behind it, you're not expecting the illusion. So all of a sudden, it's, how did they do that? You know, and that's what makes it fun. You know, so I don't really think we're influencing anybody on a negative level any more than any film you see. Yeah, I think it's more of, yeah, a lot of people are exhausted after a show, which it should be. I think the audience should be as exhausted as we are, you know. But I mean, I really doubted when we started doing it, if there was anybody going to go out and build, there was going to be a rash of guillotine murders because of us. We don't suggest guns on stage, we don't suggest knives or anything like that, because that's something you can actually go and get. We suggest things that are impossible.
Have you done any exchange with the songs in YouTube?
We're doing, in this tour we're doing right now, we're doing Give It Up, The World Needs Guts, and Simple Disobedience. And we weren't doing Man Behind the Mask because it wasn't hard enough for the stage. It actually wasn't heavy enough. We're doing one more, I can't remember what it is. Teenage Frankenstein, of course. That's the whole production. How could I forget Teenage Frankenstein?
What the older stuff, like the Davis or...
We're doing Dwight Fry, and Ballad of Dwight Fry is fun. We're doing Cold Apple. No More Mr. Nice Guy, $1 Billion Babies, Welcome to My Nightmare, School's Out, of course, Go to Hell. And, you know, it's every once in a while we'll sew in a different one. You know, for the new show, I don't know which one of those we're going to be using. But at this point, those are the ones we're using. But we've taken them all. We've taken all these songs that were in 1970s and you know, I mean, early 70s, middle 70s songs, and we're not doing them the way they sounded then. I took them and I gave them to this band, and I said, how would these songs sound now? A band that would play them today, you know, and that's how we're doing them now, so they're much rougher than they would have been before. But I like it like that. A song like 18 takes on a whole new thing. It's still got the guts that it had before, only it sounds like 80s. I don't want it to sound nostalgic at all. You know, if you come to an Alice Cooper show, I don't want it to be an older show. You know, I want it to all sound new.
Where do you get your influences?
I watch 3 or 4 splatter movies a day, probably. That's probably my biggest addiction. Since I don't drink anymore or anything, my biggest vice, I guess, is horror movies. So I lock myself in my room and I just watch them all day.
And you still think The Evil Dead is the best one?
I think so. I haven't seen Evil Dead Part 2, but I understand it's pretty good.
I haven't seen it.
Evil Dead Part 1 is good, though. It's very, and Suspiria.
Yeah.
Suspiria is a great film. It's a fine horror movie, I think. Yeah. Some of the other, I mean, most of them are comedies anyways. Texas Chainsaw Man, it's hysterical. I mean, you know, that's one of the funniest things. Yeah. When they're trying to get the old man to knock her head off with the hammer.
So you mean the booze was that's why you had a little down period?
Oh yes, absolutely. I was drinking, like I said, 2 bottles of whiskey a day, and you know, I toured for 13 years in a row. I mean, from 1970, just right straight through, and it got to the point where it didn't bother me till the last couple of years, and then it really came down physically, mentally, everything. And I guess it was affecting what I was writing. You know, at the same time, from 75 to 80, it was so hard to get rock and roll played on the radio because disco was so big. It was just impossible to cope with the Bee Gees and people like that. And bands like Aerosmith and Alice and a lot of those bands just disappeared because, I mean, the yuppies took over the radio, you know, and we just didn't have a chance at that point. So now I'm so glad. I mean, as much as like there are bands like Bon Jovi now and Cinderella, who I consider light metal, I guess you would call it. But at least they're opening it up for the heavier bands. You know, 2 years ago there wasn't one rock and roll song on the charts. Now there's 6 or 7. That's great. To me, that's really important. You know. At least we killed disco. Buried it. Even though every once in a while you hear a lot of these English songs and they're disco in disguise. I mean, you know, you hear this.
Do you enjoy being on stage now, say 10 years ago?
More. Actually, because I'm in better shape now, really. I'm in much better shape than I was 10 years ago. And physically, the show's harder now. And so, I really like doing it, you know. I go out and run like probably 2 or 3 miles a night, you know, just about every night, just to stay in shape for the show. It's like getting ready for a boxing match. You know, it takes 2 months of getting in shape to go on tour. And I mean heavy dieting and everything like that, just to make sure that you're really in physically good shape. Because it's an athletic event to do this show. If I get done with a show, it's just like I went 15 rounds with somebody, you know. The old days, we would just drink a case of beer and go on. But it looked like after a while, I was, you know, starting to get all puffy and I was getting sloppy on stage. And I think those days are over. I think it's okay to party and everything and everybody get crazy. But it's impossible to tour on 110 shows if you're going to be smashed all the time. You know.
You're going to play at the Reading Festival next week.
Next Sunday.
That's the only appearance in Europe now.
Yes. That's going to be the only show. Yeah, it's going to be the very last show of Nightmare Returns. And then we start on the new show. And we'll be putting this one, we'll be burying this one.
And the Blood Balloons?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Lots of them. The English like to get bloody.
Do you think there's actually a limit to what you can do on stage? Do you think that your imagination is your only limit?
Yeah, I think that if you just go on stage and just produce gore with no apparent reason, then it's a different thing. If you go on stage and it makes sense with what you're doing musically, then it's valid. I don't think that you can just go up there and do a blood show without the music backing it up. If you took West Side Story and took all of the music out of it, it would just be a bunch of guys fighting with knives, dancing around and fighting. You know, that wouldn't really be exciting. If you put the music to it, it's a whole different thing. It's the same thing with an Alice Cooper show. If you take the music out of it, it's really just a bunch of guys up there and Alice threatening the audience. When you put the music to it, it's a real valid experience. You know, you walk away from it going, what did I just see? You know, because there's so many things happen that people cannot possibly remember everything that happened in that show. You know, and so the music has always been it's the first thing with us. We spend, I would say, 75% of the time on the music and about 25% on the theatrics. I think a lot of people think it's the opposite of that we spend more time with theatrics. It's really not true. The music's really got to come first.
Do you spend much time in the studio as well? I mean, except for the last album.
Yeah, well, this album actually, you know, I don't understand how bands can spend 6 months in a studio. That usually has to happen because the band doesn't know what they're doing, or they're probably writing the album in the studio. Kane and I, we wrote the whole thing, and recorded the whole, I mean, we wrote it before we went to the studio for about 3 months and arranged it, and we knew exactly what was going to happen. So we recorded the whole thing in 5 weeks, you know, and he's a perfectionist. Kane's a perfectionist, and so is Michael Wagner. So, I mean, we had everything that we wanted on tape within 5 weeks, and then it took like 2 weeks to mix it. And, you know, I don't think you really have to go any further than that in the studio, unless you're going to put the London Philharmonic Orchestra on it or something like that, which then you're not playing rock and roll. You know?
When you're playing live these days, do you feel like you have your own audience with you, or is it a new, younger audience here?
I think we've got about half and half. I think we're getting like, the ones up front are all, you know, 16 years old, you know, which is great. I think we get like the same audience that Ozzy gets, you know, and the same audience that Motley gets, at least in the States. It's a, you know, I think there's like a heavy metal audience right now. I mean, a conglomerate they'll go to every metal show. They'll go to see, you know, Iron Maiden, and they'll go to see as much as they'll go to see Alice Cooper. Then I think that there are the old fans. They're waved in the back, you know, because I never see them. I only see the ones that are up in front, but I know they're there. On the last tour, I mean, for ourselves, we set like records for attendance. So that was surprising to me because we hadn't toured in 4 years that we drew that many people. You know? But I liked the idea. All the people that had heard about Alice Cooper, you know, and had sort of heard references from these other bands about Alice Cooper and heard the dark legends of all this, you know, finally got to see the show and they weren't disappointed. They saw more than they were expecting. And I was happy with that. And then the next show, they'll see even more than that.
What do you think, how do you feel when you're seeing new bands growing up, just trying to look as you?
That's a compliment, you know, I mean, I think it's a compliment. But a lot of those bands, well, you know, like I'll meet them and everything and they'll apologize, you know? And I'll say, you don't have to apologize, I mean, that's the idea. We started this thing so that other bands could do this, you know, I mean, I've never really met any band that's really been assholes about it at all, you know. Most of the bands have been very cool, you know. Every time I see Gene Simmons, he apologizes for what Kiss has done, you know. I said, listen, well, just do it, it's fine. You know, I consider Kiss, I like them as friends and everything, you know, I think they're a good band, but I'm now in competition with them. I'm back out in competition with them, so I treat them as competition, you know. They're all my friends, really.
Have you ever considered stop playing rock and roll and just lay back?
No, I did for a while after I stopped drinking. I didn't know if I was going to be Alice again. I really didn't know if I was going to be able to play the character, you know, without alcohol. And I found that the character is more of a psychic part of myself, you know. It's more of a schizophrenia. And I think I need Alice as much as Alice needs me. Because I get up on stage and I become Alice, and I definitely become Alice. And it's somebody that I have no idea where he comes from. And I really don't want to know where he comes from. To be honest with you, I would rather him be a total mystery to me. But I think everybody needs an Alice. I think everybody in this room has an alternate personality. And if they had a stage and makeup, you know, would create their own Alice. And it's a great release. I mean, I probably won't have to see a psychiatrist anymore because Alice does all of my sinning for me.
Never get tired of?
No, I don't. I really don't. I really enjoy it. You know, I always said that the day that I couldn't get an audience standing for an hour and a half, it would be the day I quit. You know, if I can't get in front of an audience anywhere on this planet and make them stand up for an hour and a half, then it's not worth doing anymore. You know, and that'll be my cue that I'm not effective anymore if I can't get them to stand up. But so far it hasn't happened. You know, even the audience that didn't want to like us ended up liking the show. You know, we got down in the South, and oh man, every single show was banned and picketed. And Baptists against Alice, and mothers against Alice, and grandmothers against Alice. Every single show they tried to stop. in the South. It was great.
Did this
I went,
happen?
yeah, all right.
Did this happen last tour? No?
Last tour. You know, we didn't have this much problem. Even when we were doing like Schools Out in the early 70s, when it was a real shock, when the Alice Cooper thing was a real shock, we didn't have nearly the problems that we did on the last tour. I mean, they really got down on it, and the PMRC hate us. They just absolutely hate us.
But I heard in the States there are some other bands which have the same problems.
Oh, I mean, everybody does. Every single band in the state. They put us on the top of their hit list, though. They even put it in the paper that Alice Cooper, now that I'm touring again, is like on the top of their list. And it's funny because the PMRC is, you don't have that over here. You don't have the PMRC. You have a different kind of censorship, but it's, the PMRC is a bunch of senators' wives that got tired of playing cards in the afternoon, you know, and they decided they were going to change the world. They were going to make the world better, so they would censor rock and roll. And the funny thing is they start out, the premise of their criticism is that every teenager in America is stupid. That's how they start out. I mean, so right there you know that they're starting out on the wrong level. They're saying every kid out there is too dumb to know what's reality and what isn't. And so the kids immediately hate them. You know, they're like a giant parent going, it's a giant finger, you know, going like that in your face. And every kid out there goes, so what they're doing is they've made Alice Cooper and all of us, you know, and the Motley Crues and everything, they've made us instant heroes, instant outlaws, you know, and it was for a while, we were all total, you know, we were rock and roll bands and it was acceptable. Now we're outlaws again. I think the PMRC did us a great justice. I think they are very necessary, you know, because they're just like the giant mom and dad.
Were you involved in the discussion between Frank Zappa, Dee Snider, and?
No, I wasn't. But I mean, they were well represented,
Yeah.
you know. And that all happened before we decided that we announced that we were going to be back in the business, you know. And so I think if we would have been around, they would have definitely, you know, had. I don't know what I would have said to them. I would have said the same thing. You got this against this, you know, and I know who's going to win.
But watch out when you come to Sweden for the Swedish censor.
Well, I mean, actually, there's nothing in the show that's illegal. There's really nothing that's illegal. They would probably watch the show first and tell us what they thought was illegal. But we've never had to change the show. You know, as much as we went to Canada and they threatened to throw us in jail if we did the show. And then when they came and saw it, they were expecting something different. I guess they figured we were going to slaughter animals on stage or something, you know. Or we're going to have a human sacrifice, and there were naked girls all over. But you know, unfortunately, there were no naked girls on stage. They were all in the audience. They were in the hotel rooms.
Have you got any contact with Frank Zappa?
I haven't seen Frank in a long time, you know. I haven't seen him for probably 10 years, really. Because I was more involved with Frank when he was touring and doing rock and roll. When he got more into the jazz thing, I kind of lost contact with him. I know Dweezil, and you know, the kids for a while. But I haven't seen Frank in a long time. I like Frank. Frank's a brilliant guy.
We got an influence from Screaming Jay Hawkins.
I've never seen Screaming Jay Hawkins, but I remember he always used to say, this Alice Cooper comes out in a coffin. I never came out in a coffin. I mean, I really know, I heard one song that Screaming Jay Hawkins has done, which is Rhythm and Blues. Yeah. So I mean, we've never done a Rhythm and Blues song. You know, I really don't understand what the influence is, except that he's, in his own way, I guess he was pretty theatrical, you know.
He still is.
Is he? Yeah.
Yeah, he went to Sweden last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd like to see him.
It was fun.
Yeah. Arthur Brown, I thought was great. But I mean, I understand he's cute.
You said everybody needs an Alice inside himself or herself. Do you leave or after Alice after the shows totally, or?
You have to, I think. I think you have to leave the character, or at least most of the character on stage. Because if that character, Alice, when I watch the videotapes of Alice, that person could not live in society the way I can. But, you know, when you think of it, who's more dangerous, really? You know, I always used to be more frightened by the Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein and the creature, because he was responsible for the creature. He was really the one that was sick, or Edgar Allan Poe, who created those, you know, those characters. H.P. Lovecraft, who created those ideas, is a much more dangerous character than, you know, than the fictitious characters. So Alice is a fictitious character, and he only lives up there for an hour and a half. And so, you know, that makes me think that I'm probably in worse shape than he is.
What would you do if you didn't play rock and roll?
I don't know. I'd probably write movies. I would probably write films. I don't know if I would direct, but I would probably write. I don't know, I'd be involved somehow in something visual, I think. Oh. Or, you know, even if when I stop performing, I'll probably still write. Because I find it very easy to write rock and roll. It's fun, you know. Or I might create Alice 2. I might find somebody that's the next Alice and just be the brains behind Alice and say, okay, now this is what you do. To do that, Alice just go on for generations and generations. It'd be great. It could very well happen. I mean, nobody's ever done that, so it's an idea.
I think it was 50 years ago exactly this week. It was Goose Out of the English singing.
Really?
Yeah. Did you think at that time that it was still around?
It's, you know, at that time I didn't even think I'd live past to be 30, you know. I'm 39 now, so I mean, I almost made it to 40. And I may not make it to 40. I have a better chance of making it to 40 now than I did 10 years ago. I don't know, I don't think that the age thing really means anything anymore. Because when I look around, most of the guys that are still doing it are older than I am. Ronnie Dio, I think is 42 or something. I know Bowie's older than I am.
40.
Yeah, a lot of those guys, I mean, most of the guys are older than I am. I've just been popular longer than they have. I started earlier. And so, you know, the fact that I'm still around now makes it seem like a lot of people say, aren't you 52 years old?
Everybody
No,
changed back. I don't know
39
why.
years old. Rolling Stone even had it that my birthday was in Christmas Day 1943 or 45 or something like that. And it's actually February 4th, 48. But everybody says, well, Rolling Stone said. Jeez, sorry, I didn't mean to. Talking about the Bible, you know. Rolling Stone can be wrong, and usually is.
Well, they got your Greatest Hits album, 5-star.
Yeah, well, they weren't wrong about that. But they also had in the top 20 concerts of all time. I mean, did you see some of the bands that were in there?
No.
Threw me for a Creedence Clearwater.
No Cooper Show.
No. And the next week they sent in letters, you know, people sent in letters saying, how come Alice Cooper wasn't in there? It's because they really don't like me. Rolling Stone is like, it's sort of like not on good terms with me, I guess.
Everything rock and roll.
Breaks my heart too. I don't know. I don't think that they're really a rock and roll magazine. I always said I would much rather be on the cover of Kerrang than Rolling Stone. You know, because people that read Rolling Stone are 40 years old. You know, and they don't think like teenagers. They don't think like kids. I'm almost 40, but I mean, I'm mentally about 15. Maybe my IQ also.
Can you imagine yourself standing on the stage in, say, about 15 years?
Yeah, maybe.
54.
54. Why? I'd say if they still stood up and I still had the energy to do it, I would still do it. You know?
Have to roll you in a wheelchair.
Yeah, maybe. But I'll tell you what, if I used to think that about, you know, when I was 25. You know, I felt worse when I was 25 than I do now. And of course that was on my own doing, you know, I mean, of course. But no, like I said, if I went out on stage and the audience, if it was a joke, I wouldn't do it. Unless it was a good joke, then I would do it. You know, if I thought the audience was getting off on that level, I would do it. But it would always be hard rock, and it would always be based on horror. And as long as that works, then I'll do it. And if it doesn't work, then I'll, like I said, I'll drop out and create another Alice.
Isn't the risk that when rock stars getting older, that people just come to see them for nostalgic reasons?
That's why.
Chuck Berry nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about Chuck Berry, though, is Chuck Berry's playing his music the way that he did in 1955. If you want to stay back there, it's different. I think the reason why Bowie's out on tour right now, and Elton, is because they've modernized. They're not staying back there, and the same with us. We're not going to be satisfied playing, even though we're playing the older songs because the audience demands that. We're not playing them the way we played them back then. You know, I'm getting musicians that can play rings around my original band. You know, and a lot of people get mad at me. They say, "Well, we want to hear it the way it was." You know, and I say, "Well, sorry, you have to go on a time warp because we're not going to play it like that." You know, they'll certainly recognize the song, but they got to let us breathe a little bit. You know, I mean, I refuse. I don't want to be a relic. I don't want to sit back and say, "Okay, now let's do this exactly like we did it in '72," or the audience will get mad. You know, I think if they're there to have fun, they're going to be involved in the way I want to do it now. I don't think it's a selfish attitude.
Are you going to release a new single before you release the album?
Yeah, I think the new single is going to be, it's the theme from John Carpenter's new movie. It's called Prince of Darkness. And it's a film that I got to be in also, and we did the music to it, to one of them, just the theme song for it. And it's really good. I mean, if you like John Carpenter films, Halloween or The Thing, all this stuff, I was really happy to work with him on this thing.
You're acting in the movie also?
Yes. I play the leader of a, what do they call them here? They're bag people in New York City, like the old people that live on the street.
The same name here.
Yeah. And we're all possessed. And it's got some great things in it. I kill somebody with a bicycle in it. I run a bicycle through the sky. Through it. It's great.
You said you wrote one song, the title track.
Just the title track. And I don't know if it's going to even be used in the beginning or the end or how they're going to do it.
But that will be the next single.
That'll be the next single. And then there's a song after that, I think, called Freedom, which is sort of an answer to the PMRC.
From the new...
Yeah. Yeah. I love it when good-looking girls come through the door, don't you? It's great. What an entrance.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, great. There's no problem for you. No, it's only for me now.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's okay. No problem at all.
I don't scare her. I won't scare her.
Okay.